So welcome everybody. I'm Bob Lowe. I'm the president of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, and we brought this town hall together to talk about the drought, as we're probably everybody on here is their number one concern in life right now. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brady Stagnicki, and he can fill you in on just what we're doing or what we're trying to get done. Brady?
Thanks, Bob. I'll take the next few minutes here to outline the immediate drought and wildlife relief measures that CCA and provincial cattle associations have requested federal and provincial governments to implement very quickly. The first request is to enact temporary but immediate measures on crop insurance programming to support the timely designation of crops into livestock feed. So, a number of requests here within this that I'll go over, but, we've requested that crop insurance corporations really expedite approvals for insured crops to be designated for livestock feed or grazing purposes. It's critical that their crop insurance office staff and adjusters can assist with producer requests or questions in a timely manner, and doing this through proper resourcing and internal modifications to operations to increase that flexibility during this time of urgency. We're also requesting under crop insurance that there be some incentives or preferential treatment to be announced so that it helps allow crops to be grazed or converted into feed without penalty. So one option is to increase the low yield appraisal thresholds values for farmers who salvage crops into livestock feed without impacting that future individual coverage. So this was actually a measure announced in Saskatchewan last week, and we'd like to see this widely implemented across the drought-stricken provinces immediately. Some other incentives on crop insurance that we'd like to see is excluding or lowering the weighted average of the current crop year yields from a producer's long-term individual yield calculation or individual production index calculation if their crop is used for feed or grazing. We think that would be an incentive to really help more crop go into feed production. And another option would be looking at some sort of premium rebate or discount on next year's crop insurance premiums for producers who are designating crops into livestock feed. This request is very urgent given the closing window available to salvage crops for feed, and it's a top priority for the beef industry to maintain the cattle herd by working with grain and oilseed farmers to convert these failed or poor crops into suitable feed while this opportunity still exists. The next request that we've made is focused on water. We're urging governments to dedicate additional resources to support quality water access and infrastructure. The lack of access to quality water is increasingly becoming an animal health and welfare concern for beef producers. There are many regions across the country that have dugouts that have dried out, existing water supply that may contain concentrated salts or toxic substances that could put cattle health at risk. We recognize that there's been some provincially administered cost-shared programming that is currently available to support producers with water management, such as the Ag Action Program in Manitoba that recently reopened, or Saskatchewan's announcement to enhance the Farm and Ranch Water Infrastructure Program. These are helpful programs that I'd encourage producers to look into. But given the severity of the situation around water, we are recommending that federal and provincial governments dedicate additional resources to support beef producers, upgrading or replenishing their water infrastructure in a timely manner, and where needed, enact emergency provisions that allow producers to draw water in order to address their shortage situation. The next request that we've made is that federal and provincial governments immediately initiate drought relief programming under Aggro recovery to assist with extraordinary costs related to feed and water shortages and impacts of wildfires to help maintain the national cattle herd. So federal and provincial governments have a history of providing support to livestock producers to purchase supplemental feed, to maintain cattle inventories in a major drought, flood, or or even disease-related disaster event. So some of the support programs in the past have focused on a feed need design, which would provide direct support to partially cover extraordinary costs of feeding animals on a per animal per day basis. And in our view, this is a preferable program design compared to a transportation subsidy design, as our experience has shown that these subsidies can regularly be capitalized by the transport sector with higher freight costs. So we have recommended a feed need per animal per day assistance design to help support producers, as it will provide more options and flexibility that helps make useful management decisions when procuring those alternative feed sources to maintain the cattle herd. As mentioned earlier, support for extraordinary costs when it comes to water must also be considered in the agri-recovery program design. And on wildfires, particularly in BC, which will be discussed just shortly after in the meeting, we are requesting that an initiative along the lines of the 2017 BC Wildfire Agri-Recovery Program be implemented, along with immediately declaring that BC wildfires be eligible for disaster financial assistance. The last request I'll touch on is the livestock tax deferral provision. We've requested that the federal government immediately implement the livestock tax deferral provision for the entire prairie provinces and parts of Ontario and BC that have been impacted by drought conditions. So we do know that Agriculture Canada and the Department of Finance are working on getting this rolled out quickly as we speak here today. Due to the severity of the situation and limitations with the current livestock tax deferral program, we've also asked that its eligibility be expanded to include all classes of cattle. So for example, the deferral could be used on replacement heifers, for example, and that it span over more than 1 year to allow more flexibility in producers' restocking decisions. So just to conclude, and I know we kind of jumped right into the recommendations, and we'll have some provincial context and updates following this. I just want to recognize that we know this disaster situation may widely differ based on a producer's location and situation. So we're emphasizing that programs be designed to specifically address the problems at hand, and that all requests that I outlined be implemented as soon as possible to ensure producers have the most options available to them in a timely manner. So now that we've run through the immediate requests on disaster relief for cattle producers, we'll have some provincial updates on the drought and wildfire situations from provincial presidents or chairs, we'll start in BC, and then we'll go all the way out into Ontario. So I see that the BC Cattlemen's Association president, Rennie Ardill, is on, and General Manager Kevin Boone as well. So we'll maybe start with you, and then I'll move it along towards the east.
Hey, thanks, Brady. We had here in the North Piece, we had an inch of rain over the last couple of days, but I hear that the South Piece didn't get anything like that. And like most of the hay crops are grown to the point where they're not going to grow that much more. People are saying that they're having a third to half of what they usually get for yield. So there is going to be shortages of feed, even with this moisture, although I think it should help some of the grain crops a bit. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin for an update on the rest of the province, because our biggest problem in the south at the moment is fires. I don't believe the southern part of the province has got any rain at all. And Kevin's right in the middle of all that mess. So Kevin, would you please take it from here?
Thanks, Rennie, and thanks to CCA for putting this on, as well as heading up the initiative for recovery and for help for the farmers and ranchers. As Rennie indicated, we're in a different situation out here, where the northern part of the province is a little better situation than the southern, but when we come from mid-province south in the interior, it has had no moisture basically since early April, perhaps late March. Cold spring really deterred the start of a lot of the crops in the first place. And then the heat event that took place in early June, late May, created a real issue for us as well. When you start getting temperatures up in the mid to high 50s, record highs of 49.5, it has just literally parched the grass that was there. So we're in an extremely drought-ridden position where hay production is way down, but more severely is the fire situation right now. Typically, we don't start fires till the end of July. This year, we had them burning the end of June. We have to date burnt 275,000 hectares, well over 500,000 acres of land. Most of this is in our prime grasslands. And so while we call them forest fires, they're wildfires that are taking out that grass. So not only are we down in what our winter supply is, we're now eating up our summer and winter supplies with fire, which will have no recovery for it. So we're in a double whammy situation of losing our summer pasture and much of our winter as we move forward. It's really extremely hard for us to predict where this is going to come out. Right now we have over 300 wildfires that are burning. We've had 1,100 burn to date. A typical year, we won't have 300 burn. And here we are 2 weeks into it with over 1,100 have burnt and 300 burning. So that aspect of it is going to make it extremely difficult for us to predict how much shortages we'll have, but we know it will be severe. We are looking at opportunities for supplementing that in spots such as from the lower mainland and whatnot, but it's going to be extremely difficult. The provincial government here has come forward and announced that there will be recovery assistance for fire in some form. It will probably emulate much of what it was in 2017. But here again, our biggest concern is going to be, can we save that mother cow herd and our base herd here and carry on? I think I'll leave it there. Every other province is in similar or dire situations, and I think we're in the middle of a crisis for our industry that really needs to be dealt with. So thanks for the opportunity, and we'll move forward from here.
Great. Thank you, Kevin and Rennie. Next, we'll go to Melanie Woke, who is the chair of Alberta Beef Producers, for an Alberta update.
Thanks, Brady. The Alberta Beef Producers executive and staff have been monitoring the conditions across Alberta over the last several weeks, and as concerns of the widespread nature of the drought continue to elevate, as it was realized that conditions were deteriorating rapidly throughout the Western provinces, the Canadian Cattlemen's Association held a meeting with provincial organization chairs and managers for a national discussion on disaster relief options to establish an industry position and to provide producer-led solutions. The end of last week, the Alberta Beef Producer General Manager, Brad Dubo, and I met with AFSC representatives to clearly communicate the solution was quickly becoming extremely serious, and requested that AFSC start communicating options to livestock and crop producers through their channels. By Friday afternoon, ABP started to push information to producers about options and contacting county and municipal councillors to make them aware of how their area was being affected. ABP has also been handling a steady flow of media requests and updating ABP daily as new information is available. A timeline of what we've been up to, I'm just going to quickly as follows. On June 30th, ABP and the Alberta Cattle Feeders Association met with the Northern Rural Caucus, as well as the Capital Region Caucus, to discuss issues facing the Alberta beef industry. ABP took an opportunity to specifically emphasize the risk of drought and its impact on beef producers, as we were in the midst of a record-breaking heat wave. But that also combined with a lack of moisture as well as windy conditions, it really sped up pasture and crop deterioration. On July 9th, as mentioned, I, along with GM Brad Dubo, met with AFSC staff to discuss program options and producer communication. That was then followed by a news release that was sent out urging government action and asking producers to reach out to municipalities. The goal was to make the federal and provincial governments aware of our rapidly deteriorating situation and to begin to trigger the Aggro recovery process. On July 12th, ABP Government Relations and Policy Lead Mark Lysing met with the Alberta Environment and Parks group on further drought options, such as expediting water approvals on government leases, utilization of vacant crown lands for grazing or haying, as well as allowing subletting for unused crown lands. On July 13th, the Vice Chair Jason Hale and I attended the Calgary Stampede Economic Recovery Reception hosted by Agriculture and Forestry Minister Devin Dreeshen. Premier Kenny and Minister Dreeshen gave speeches emphasizing their focus on ag moving forward and its importance in the province's economic recovery. Jason and I spoke with multiple politicians and their staff and AFSC representatives regarding the drought situation in the province. Once again, our message was clearly that for the urgency for a solid response as the window for converting crops to cattle feed was quickly closing. On July 14th, ABP staff then provided informal recommendations to Minister Dreeshen ahead of the federal provincial territorial partnership meeting on July 15th. These recommendations were aligned with those put forward federally by the CCA and emphasized prioritizing the full exploration of agro recovery. The recommendations were as follows: to allow insured crops to be designated for alternative use in a timely manner, to allow support for quality water access and infrastructure, to implement a feed need drought assistance programming under agro recovery, and an immediate announcement of the list of designated regions for the 2021 Livestock Tax Deferral. On July 14th, I then attended the Calgary Stampede International Ag and Agri-Food Reception, which was a smaller event that allowed for more conversation with federal and provincial politicians and industry leaders. On July 15th, Alberta did receive verbal commitment from Ottawa that a joint agri-recovery program will be initiated to support prairie producers affected by drought conditions prior to the possibility of a federal election being called. I just want to make it clear that it's been ABP's mission to initiate drought solutions as quickly as possible. I can say that rather than just increasing government awareness, we attempted to provide solutions that producers were asking for. Unfortunately, we don't have all the solutions, but ABP will continue our efforts in maintaining a viable industry through these unbelievably tough times, which will likely impact our industry for the next several years. We're a very resilient industry, but we need to ask for some help.
Great, thank you so much, Melanie. Next, we'll go to Saskatchewan and hear from Arnold Balicki, the chair of Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association.
Hi all, I apologize for not being able to get on when the meeting started, but I'm here now. Kevin and Melanie have really expressed what I would say, and I'm sure Manitoba and parts of Ontario are going to say the same thing, that how dire we are. In Saskatchewan, you can go down 5 inches and there is not a drop of moisture. I do want to commend Mr. Merritt for his swiftness in responding to the crisis situation when it was brought up that we needed some help. You know, he lowered the threshold for the low yield so that crop guys who want to have their crop written off and allow livestock producers to go in and salvage that for feed. So that was huge. He made some announcements to our water programs. You know, the up to $150,000 now for livestock producers up until March 31st from April 1st. And that's good. And, you know, the first 50,000 is 50% shared. And then the other 100,000 is cost shared, 70% government, 30% producer. And that's all fine. But as producers tell me, we have to have the money in our pocket to even do the first part of our deal for purchasing or expanding irrigation or wells or piping, and they don't have the money. And so that's the big concern. There's two things going on here. First, we need access to feed supply. We need good quality drinking water for our livestock. And then the second component is we need some money in our jeans so that we can afford to buy the feed and do the water works that's required. So that's where we're from in Saskatchewan. You know, we need additional measures to get us through this. And Minister Merritt is really on top of it, and he understands the predicament we're in. We're having a roundtable meeting tomorrow. The livestock industry is having a roundtable meeting tomorrow with him. On Thursday, myself, the executive, and some of our staff are meeting in person in Regina with him to further update where we're at and possibly go through some solutions that we can go forward on. More things need to happen. And it was great. He asked to have the entire province designated as eligible for a livestock tax deferral program for all producers. And let's forget about the designated area. Yes, there is a couple of pockets that have had some rain and it's not bad, but the entire province for the most part is in dire need. And as we all know, precipitation does not stop at any municipal boundary or any road. It'd go, and so to designate certain areas would just not work this year. It's all wrong to do that. So I'm very proud that he took the initiative to ask for the entire province. As I understand it, Minister Merritt was one of the first ag ministers to start the process for ag recovery with the feds by sending in a request to do so. So, you know, hats off to him for that. He's really working hard with us. The stress that these producers are going through is just unimaginable. I've had so many phone calls that I can't even count the number of phone calls. But I want producers to rest assured that SCA is working behind the scenes almost daily, if not daily, to try and work with both levels of government to come up with some type, and CCA, to come up with some type of better programming so that we can acquire the feed and move forward. And so I know we're not out in the media, and that is for good reason. SCA is not a grandstanding organization. We will not go out and make statements until we have it verified by governments or whoever else. And so I just ask producers to bear with us that we are working on it, and not to get you know, upset or think that we're not doing anything, because we're working on your behalf. And there are a lot of things, you know, for instance, I think all the crops north of Blaine Lake, whatever grain producer wants to allow salvaging of that feed for the livestock producer, I think we can supply the entire province, just like Kevin indicated that they could access feed from the lower mainland. There's a lot of feed to be accessed up here. And we have people drive by and say, oh, you got a pretty nice crop. Yes, we do. It's knee high, it's green, or kind of green. But it's like driving by a forest and saying, well, that's a terrific forest, but it's not. If you get out and start looking at the trees individually, it's not that great. And that's how this crop is. You pull out plants, the root system is dead. The heads are they're white, and there's the odd kernel in there. Most of it is chaff. So yeah, it's deceiving. It's not that great. The other thing that was brought up to us, and it's really a great discussion I think we need to push forward on, and that is the orderly marketing of all the call cows that are going to be coming to town if producers can't acquire the feed resources they need and decent quality of water. And I'm not saying we're looking at a set-aside program, but I think the industry and government and the packing houses need to come up with a plan to be able to handle the number of animals that are going to come to slaughter. And how they're going to do that, I'm not quite sure. And I'm hoping that'd be a discussion we can have with Minister Merritt on Thursday. But animal welfare will be an issue if producers completely run out of any type of feed source and they have to get these cattle to market, and the slaughter facilities do not have the capacity to slaughter them for a time period. So those things are all there. All I can say is this is the worst episode of drought that I've ever seen in the province in my history, and I am getting up in age. I know southern Saskatchewan from time to time, yes, they have droughts, but not to this extreme. And the drought years on top of drought years has depleted all of our moisture resources that are there, and so there just isn't enough to have the feed supply we need or the quality of water we have. Even if we got rain now, it's not really going to help this year. Maybe with the water supply it would, but as far as the feed supply, it's not going to help this year, but it would help rejuvenate our grasslands for next year. So I'm going to stop there, Brady. I could go on for another 10 minutes, but I'm not going to do that.
Great. Thank you for the update, Arnold. Next, we'll move into Manitoba, and we have the president of Manitoba Beef Producers, Tyler Fulton, on the line. I'll pass it over to you, Tyler.
Oh, thanks, Brady. And thanks for the opportunity to kind of get out there and relay some of the things that we're working on. There's obviously a ton of consistency across the West, and that really is the take-home message, is how widespread this problem is and why it's unique. And so I'm going to be brief on the condition side. For anybody from Manitoba, I don't need to belabor this. It's widespread deficit in moisture, with areas in particular around the Interlake and some of the southwest portions of the province that are dire. Where there's simply no pasture, that there hasn't been pasture for weeks now, and there's very little prospect for winter feed production in those areas as well. At this point, we could see a positive weather event, but it really wouldn't move the needle in terms of our ability to produce enough winter feed, I think, for the cow herd to be able to maintain it. So that's where a large focus of ours has been. I would say at Manitoba Beef Producers, our focus has kind of been two ways, short-term and long-term. We've really worked over the course of the last few weeks to secure some type of an incentive, as Brady alluded to, for crop producers to convert to alternate use. Just to be able to create and produce as much winter feed as we can to mitigate the effects across the industry. I'm not like, I guess I wanted to make it clear that a lot of the initiatives that Brady has already kind of laid out, Manitoba has been part of those discussions and contributed, and so I don't feel like we need to go through those again. But I think maybe one aspect that maybe hasn't been touched on in greater detail is the fact that we know that there's already thousands of animals that are moving to that have moved to market, and that we know that there just likely won't be enough feed to maintain the herd in the size that we've been used to, and so. As a result of that reality, I think that Manitoba Beef Producers could have an aspect of our ask to be considerate of those producers that have had to make those tough but rational decisions in order to maintain good humane care for the animals, to move them. And so we think that maybe some type of support that would help a recovery in the herd in the long run may be part of our ask, and our intention is to flesh that out and get consensus really before the end of this week. I think that covers most of it. I wanted to make you aware that Manitoba 2 has put the request in for Aggro recovery assessment. Actually, it was done late last week. Of course, we've had a bit of a disruption in our political representation, given that our ag minister was is new as of Thursday, replacing another one, but I'm confident that he's aware of the situation, and we've already had meeting with his staff this morning to make sure that that we're all on the same page. I think that's probably all that I need to that I need to cover here now. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Tyler, for that update. And last, we'll go to Rob Lipsitz out of Ontario for the update. Rob's the president of the Beef Farmers of Ontario. Go ahead, Rob.
Thanks, Brady, and thanks to all the other chairs and presidents for the immense amount of work that I know has gone into just this one topic over the past 2 weeks. Similar story here in Ontario to what you're hearing from everyone else. Little different in that Southern Ontario has been receiving adequate rain, but the further north you move, the more dire the situation gets. I would say that in late May, we started discussions with our ag minister. As we noted at that point, all of the province hadn't received any rain since early April. So BFO prompted the minister to start thinking about drought, and we started discussing measures that we could take at that point in time. Late in June, we had a cabinet shuffle here. We do have a new ag minister working in our advantage, I think. She and her husband operate a livestock farm in one of the drier areas of the province. So she stepped right into the role, totally understanding the issues and the situation. So we've had pretty good discussion and feedback from our provincial government. We had those initial talks about strategy and some of the recommendations we put forward. A lot of those were incorporated into the CCA ask. But we're at the point now where we are discussing with our politicians that the rains that we have had just were not timely. And it may look like the $1 million rain, but all the crops were dormant by the time it came. So doing a bit of education right now to let them know that rain at the wrong time is not always a good thing. And early discussions about moving forward in the future of not just the industry, but the state and the growth of our hay and pasture for next year and years to come, considering how dry it's been here. Some good news out of the most hard-hit area of the province. Kim Jo Bliss has joined me from the BFO board today, and she actually farms in the Rainy River District, which has been our worst hit area of the province. Some of the municipal councils in that northwestern area last week requested that our provincial government declare a state of emergency in that area of the province. And that has prompted a lot of other councils in Eastern Ontario and Central Ontario to make that same request. And our indication is all that bodes well to get some form of relief and action if we can get state of emergency declaration. So working forward, we're continuing to work with our ag minister and all of you on the call here nothing we want more than a resolution, but our biggest concern at this point is that we are short feed and there's no sign of any surplus feed anywhere in the province. So I'm not sure how we're going to get through it, even if we have a feed need program. Cost of feed is going to be through the roof here in Ontario. So I'd maybe ask Kim Jo just to give a brief update or anything that I've missed from her dire situation in Northwest Ontario.
Thanks, Rob, and everyone else on the call. No, we're very similar to Tyler. Obviously, we're only about 3 hours from Winnipeg, and that's the same, Tyler. We have no pasture, so no hay and then no pasture. So there's cattle obviously flooding your market in Manitoba, and I'm very concerned about this industry and in particular, obviously the Rainy River District. But yeah, Rainy River is not known for this, so this is very new to us, and like we are hurting, and there was 10 drops of rain this morning, but we've had 4 millimeters this month, and normally we'd be around 12 inches normal for the growing season, and in some places they're lucky if they have 2. So yeah, I'm concerned about the cattle that are leaving and what's going to happen here in the district. So thank you.
Thanks, Rob and Kim, for the update. So now we will be opening up the questions for questions from the audience. So please type your question into the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen. Please include your name and province in your question. And I'll be moderating the Q&A, so I'll do my best to direct the questions to the panelists. So just as they've been kind of coming in here early, and I know it's kind of been answered through the chat, I'm not sure if all the audience can see Kevin's answers around Crown land pasture utilization, but it was asked in the Ontario context and actually first brought up by Melanie in Alberta. So maybe I'll ask from the Ontario perspective first, because there's a direct question to that, and Kevin, if you wanted to add in after from the BC perspective or any other province. But the question, I guess I'll send it to Rob and Kim. What's the use of Crown land for pasture in Northwestern Ontario? Has there been any discussions around that for the North?
Yeah, I'd suggest it was last Wednesday, I believe, was the last time Kim Jo and I met with Minister Thompson here in Ontario, and we were kind of throwing around ideas, and that idea came up that maybe it's time to, with the state of emergency declaration, perhaps we could get away with the Crown land release procedure, which is very onerous. And we discussed the idea of maybe putting some fences around Crown land in the affected areas and letting cattle on there and any kind of ruminant that would graze it. So those discussions have begun. She was very open to the idea. Of course, Crown land involves far more than one ministry, and that's going to be our biggest hurdle right now. But it seems that every issue we tackle has more than one hurdle, and we're ready for that again. We have a meeting again this week on Wednesday with Minister Thompson, and we'll start that discussion about Crown land once again.
Thanks. Kevin, did you want to maybe just, I know you already typed it out, but just provide a little bit of context there with the question that was asked from a BC perspective for the whole audience?
Sure, Brady. And with my typing skills, it takes a lot longer to type than it does to talk, so it's appreciated. We're in a little different situation in BC in that our Crown lands are what we depend on for our summer grazing anyway. About 95% of our grazing occurs on Crown land. There's very little that isn't utilized on most given years that is adequate that we can get onto, that is fenced, that is a train and stuff. We are looking and working with government right now to identify those areas that might be available. I think some of the challenge there is that the terrain is sometimes more difficult, and what is the risk for wildfire on that? If we get the cattle out on it, wildfire hits and we can't get it back off, we're in challenges, but we are looking there. There is very little opportunity, a little bit in the south and east of the province to be able to hay or put up feed on crown lands just because of the trains. Our hay is put up in valleys and in the lowlands. Where some of our opportunity is coming now, though, is out of the lower mainland for hay, where quite honestly, one of the reasons we need a state of emergency declared here is because there's a disconnect where they're really not getting the severity of either the drought or the fire situation down there. And when we talk to some, they're saying that message isn't coming through. And we need that state of emergency because there is hay lands down there. Talked to one producer that's a potato producer that has what he feels is probably 1,000 bales of hay he can put up that he would normally plow down as green fertilizer because he's paid to keep it green by some duck and bird sanctuaries. So there is some opportunities. We just got to get that message out. Crown land is one we'll capitalize on every opportunity we have, but it will be limited as well.
Thanks, Kevin. Little bit less of a question, but a comment that I think is definitely worth speaking to here is it's from Leonard and Gladys Kohler from the Manitoba Interlake region. It says, we will be needing assistance not only for feed and freight, but fencing as well. We are needing to pasture cattle on crown lands where cattle haven't previously been pastured, which will require fencing and it is very costly. And I just, wanted to raise that comment as it's, very true. And I know that as we talk about agri recovery, there has been some precedent in past initiatives to cover infrastructure alongside those extraordinary costs as mentioned. So wanted to raise that from the chat. There's a question from Karen Briere, I think from the Western producer. Do we have a sense of how many cows might go to town? I've kind of opened that up to whoever might want to answer it. Maybe I'd ask Tyler first if you want to start with that, if possible, and feel free to have other panelists jump in.
Yeah, no, I can speak to that. And just on your previous point or question, I think that, those extraordinary costs like fencing are the types of things that are, that are the reason why we opted, I think, to go the route in terms of, or we seem to be kind of migrating towards more of a per head payment, just because we know that producers will be best positioned to make the best decisions on how to feed those animals and what to feed those animals. And so to put limitations on what would be eligible and what would not be is not in the best interest of trying to solve the bigger problem. So that's, something like fencing is what you could possibly use the funds for. And I want to be clear, it's, we haven't totally zeroed in on exactly what the ask would be, but hopefully by the end of this week, we will. As far as the question with respect to the number of cows that we are breeding stock that we are likely to lose, it's obviously going to vary quite significantly from region to region. But what I can say is that in the Interlake region of Manitoba, in particular, there's very little prospect to have. I've talked to several guys that say their production is down to less than 10%, and it's just not feasible for them to be bringing in feed ingredients to support that. And so I don't think it's out of the question at all across whole regions to be looking at in excess of 50% of the herd lost. And it's a staggering effect that it will be, that'll be felt in the countryside on these individual farms and in these communities. But that's the reality right now. And there's we just can't solve the problem everywhere with a feed assistance type of program, I don't think.
Thanks, Tyler. Just going to keep on rolling through some questions here. There's a couple that are all along the same lines, and I'll maybe take a crack at it. Question from Riley Van E. Is agri-recovery part of Agristability, or are they totally different programs? It's a great question. They are different programs within the suite of business risk management programs cost shared by federal and provincial governments. Agristability is a long-standing core BRM program that covers margin drop on farm that you need to enroll in each year. Agri-recovery is a disaster framework that is intended to cover some of the extraordinary costs that go beyond other programs' ability to support producers, usually through disaster situations like drought or flooding or wildfires, as we've seen lately, or seen recently in 2017. Certainly the most recent set-aside programs in the past year have been covered under agri-recovery, and also some disease-related events, most recently with bovine tuberculosis. So it's a framework-based program that is somewhat providing ad hoc support payments, but it's more formalized than that, and it's cost shared between the federal and provincial governments, usually at 60% federal and 40% provincial. So some of the fencing costs or additional feed costs, water infrastructure costs that are extraordinary and beyond producers' ability to really manage are what's looked at under agri-recovery. It goes to a next question that was asked around from Tom Herman, that there's a rumor flying around Southern Alberta about a program in the US giving free transport of feed for producers in Montana, and those producers are coming up and buying feed with the advantage of free trucking. Is this true, and what can be done to protect the feedstocks that we do have? So I'll maybe just initially comment again that there is programming in the United States at a national level to support forage shortages and providing per head supports for a number of months, depending on how dire of a drought situation the region is in. We have shared this information with the federal government, and as a bottom line, when looking at agri-recovery support, it needs to be at the very least on par with the program in the United States to ensure that there's not incentives down south that are making more feed go to the United States than keeping it in Canada. I've got a couple questions about the livestock tax deferral and some general comments out of Manitoba, with Larry Wegner and Diane Riding saying that the tax deferral would be helpful, and it would especially be helpful in a 3 to 5 year span to allow more time for producers to restock their herds. That is 100% something that we've been advocating for with this tax deferral, livestock tax deferral, and there is some precedent with different, I guess, disease-related investigations where additional years of income could be deferred in additional years beyond the one. So that it's something that we are pushing to have happen in this widespread drought and wildfire situation. There's a lot of questions coming in here. I've got one from Larry Wegner. Can CCA work with processors and retailers to pass the reduced price for the pound cows back to the consumers? I'm not sure who wants to take this one on. Dennis or Bob? Maybe they're not on.
Is Dennis?
Yeah, I'm on. Radio is just switching between screens here. We are going to be talking to the processing industry about the situation that is developing here. You may recall last year when we had a backlog of fed animals, they actually gave preference to processing fed animals over cows. And so they have been open as we've sat down, but to have these conversations as far as, you know, how that gets reflected back into the retail and food service trade, that's another conversation that, you know, obviously we can start to have. That's occurring on both sides of the border right now, actually, as we're speaking. So I don't have a clear answer to how we get that done, but it is going to be part of the conversation.
Thanks, Dennis. Got a time for a couple more questions here. I've got a question from Dave, and maybe I'll direct this to you, Bob. Have all commodity groups got together to make a consolidated ask of the federal government?
Yes, is the short answer. We just got off a call with the Canada Grain Council, correct me if I'm wrong, Dennis, and the canola growers of Canada. And we were talking to them last week. You know, from our point of view, there's no sense going into trying to deal with crop insurance without the grains people on side. And they are fully supportive of what we're trying to do, and they understand the urgency.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Yeah, you're right. Is the Canadian Canola Growers Association and Grain Growers of Canada. Just looking through some more questions here. Just, I guess I would just comment and seeing a lot coming in about the support for having a tax deferral go for multiple years. That would be really helpful with producers restocking their herds. More comments on fencing. And just maybe wait one more minute to see if there's any questions coming in. A question from Tim Smith, and we'll maybe go with the last one here, and maybe I'll ask Melanie, just with it being Alberta based, how will AFSC assist with livestock producers to source feed from grain crop producers given high grain values?
That is something that crop producers in this area have been speaking with us about, that because of their contracts, production contracts that they have to fill, that's becoming a real issue for them. Those contract buyers are not really wanting to renege on those contracts or to possibly move them into next year. And I think that's where one stumbling block we've got right now in trying to get out there to get those crops used. I believe when we had our call with the crop people, as Bob mentioned, that there isn't much talk about what's going to happen there, but I think that's something that has to start getting opened up and figured out how we're going to do this. Again, you know, it's just the time is ticking and we need answers like yesterday. And I'm just hoping that people will realize the importance of this. The other thing that's starting to affect us here up north is that, you know, the American subsidies in regards to buying feed, they're getting quite aggressive about hay stocks, buying up hay stocks, and they are coming as far as northern Alberta for that. So it's just another added pressure on producers here as to, you know, it's a great idea to have a price or a, you know, a monetary help in purchasing feed, but it's not here. And that's just something else I wanted to bring to the forefront.
Thanks, Melanie. Before we go to Bob for some closing remarks and overview of mental health resources available, I see just in the Q&A here from cattle producer and CCA director Nathan Finney that Atlantic Canada, he mentions, has, you know, very good surpluses of feed this year. It's a strong crop year, and they just, you know, want to let everybody know that they're working on some ideas and solutions on what can be done to assist. So just wanted to pass along that message from the Maritime, and I know even in Quebec as well, that they're looking to see what can be done about the feed supplies out there and help out the western part of the country. So Bob, maybe thank you to everybody for your questions. Really appreciate them coming in. And Bob, maybe I'll pass it over to you for some closing remarks and an overview of the mental health resources.
Sure. Thanks, Brady, and thanks everybody for a pretty active town hall. This is a massive, massive problem in not just Canada, but in all of North America. And the very last thing that came up on my chat function was from Richard. The main focus is trying to get support to maintain the cattle herd. That is our primary goal. We need to maintain the Canadian cattle herd in whatever it takes to do it. We're working with everybody that we can work with to try to come up with solutions to offer to the government that actually work to fit the problem. You know, everybody, I'm going to turn my camera off because it just said my internet's unstable along with me. But this is working on all our humans' minds too. I mean, this is a really stressful situation, and we would like to stress that there is help, and don't be afraid to use the services that are out there. With that, I think unless somebody else has anything else, I would thank you for coming on, and we'll carry on as best we can. Thank you.